undertaking or commissioning evidence synthesis to inform policy. So therefore, by promoting best practice among the range of organizations and sectors, the role of high quality synthesized evidence in supporting well-founded policy. This is a very useful framework that talks about the good principles of good evidence synthesis for policy making. It talks about four dimensions of or four principles of evidence-based evidence synthesis for policy making. Number one is inclusive, that includes everyone. Number two is rigorous. The policy option weighs evidence, all policy option choices with the equal weight to each of that. There is no bias in terms of the evidence synthesis and policy making. Unbiased way of looking at, very rigorous. The next is the transparent way of looking at that there is no hidden aspects or hidden agenda. And the fourth is accessibility, that it's not a closed thing, it is open thing. So in terms of inclusive principles, the policy evidence synthesis involves policymakers and relevant, that is useful to them, should consider many times and sources of evidence, uses a range of skills and of the people. There should be rigorous assessment of the users and most comprehensive feasible body of evidence, should recognize and minimize bias, is independently reviewed as part of quality assurance process. And in terms of accessibility, it should be written in plain language, simple, concise language, should be available in suitable time frame, and it should be freely available online. In terms of transparency, should clearly describe research question, methods, sources of evidence, and quality or assurance processes, should communicate complexity and area of contention, should acknowledge assumptions, limitations, uncertainties, including any evidence gaps, should also declare personal, political, organizational conflicts of interest, and manages any aspect of conflicts. Again, the more detailed description of each of these dimensions of inclusiveness, transparency, rigorousness, and accessibility. In terms of inclusiveness, evidence synthesis should involve policymakers throughout, from design of the research question to the interpretation of finding. Is most likely to yield significant policy insights. Keeping the process inclusive makes it more likely that it will identify the full range of relevant evidence types, sources, and expertise. In terms of transparency, synthesized evidence that is transparent is likely to be more credible, replicable, and useful. A clearly describable study design should include research terms used, the databases, and other evidence sources considered, and when they're accessed, and the criteria that determine which studies are included and which are not excluded. In terms of accessibility, for synthesized evidence to be both useful and used, it must be accessible. To be useful for policymakers, either the main report or, if necessary, the short report should be written in plain language by a writer who is experienced in presenting policy information very clearly, concisely, and as objectively as possible. In terms of rigorousness, researchers should be as comprehensive as possible in identifying relevant sources and types of evidence on the topic within the time frame and within the available resources before critically appraising the quality of the evidence and analyzing it rigorously. Those carrying out the synthesis should acknowledge the potential sources of bias and aim to minimize their influence, the influence of the biases. So there are a lot more description, but I tried to explain to you the important aspects of these four dimensions or principles of evidence synthesis in terms of inclusiveness, transparency, accessibility, and rigorousness. This is a good chart that talks about the interplay of factors influencing evidence-based public health policy. The first part is scientific evidence, both quantitative or qualitative scientific evidence, or you can call it as research evidence. We are all researchers, and we all have extensive experience, and we have collected. Many of us have spent time collecting enormous amount of research evidence, or writing research papers, producing research reports, etc. Now, that is always fundamental, crucial for policy evidence synthesis. This overall, this framework talks about evidence-based policy formulation and how it is enacted. The domain that needs to be considered in evidence synthesis is the process, the content, and the outcome. The process involved is feedback, loops, issuing, dissemination channels, and so on. There are also other influencing factors in terms of resources, personal experiences, ideology, interest group, and advocacy organization. Now, there is an alternative description of evidence synthesis by RTA, the Research Triangle Institute. This is more or less like a complementary to what we discussed evidence synthesis that was largely based on the Royal Society and the Academy of Medical Sciences. Now, what the RTA described, what is their definition and articulation of evidence synthesis? They refer to evidence synthesis as understanding, extracting, clearly communicating the implications of multiple evaluations of evidence, research evidence, policy analysis evidence, all of that together, or review, whatever, together for policy and practice. The pursuit of evidence-based policy is based on the premise that policy decisions should be better informed by available evidence, robust evidence, and should include robust and rational analysis. So therefore, evidence-based approach to policy and practice is a positive development in the course of policy making. Today, large focus on evidence policy is a great development, positive development. By synthesizing evidence from multiple sources, we can develop a deeper story within the data to enable better decisions about policies and programs and matters of individual behavior choice. A lot of policy that deal with individual behavior and choices. So it is very important that we provide a synthesized evidence. Researchers and policy analysts provide synthesized evidence that is based on multiple sources. Understanding and extracting the implications of multiple evaluations for policy and practice is a large and innovative research area. Today, this area, out there is large number of policy analysis. Many of the business organization, or even within the government setting, public policy setting, or big UN organization, World Health Organization, etc. There are large number of people who work on policy analysis, who call themselves as policy analysts or policy analysis experts. Therefore, the focus on developing interactive and graphic displays that synthesize vast amounts of information, that is research information, to make it easily consumed by policy clients, stakeholders, and also the general public. That is the important part of evidence synthesis. There is an alternative way of presenting this evidence synthesis. Someone would like to call it as synthesizing evidence. Would it differ so much, synthesizing evidence? Synthesizing, the word or the term synthesizing, that refers to examining and analyzing findings from studies that are included, priced, and information towards answering specific policy questions. So if we have a particular policy question or a number of policy questions, then synthesizing refers to looking at all the evidence available from research findings or policy analysis. Very often we undertake a specific policy analysis for a particular policy question based on data that are available from a range of data sources. The detailed approach and methods used to integrate the information will depend on synthesis and the specific research question. The selector synthesis type could be qualitative, quantitative, mixed method, and the selector detailed procedures used for interpretation of evidence or data could be meta-analysis, meta-ethnography, reviews, or grounded formal theory. All of these approaches can be used in evidence synthesis. The use of either a qualitative or quantitative or mixed method approach in synthesis may affect the presentation of findings. If there is a quality, if it's largely a quantitative assessment of evidence, it is going, the findings are going to be presented as average, as averages, as they affect the numerical counting, and the results are presented as numerical data and figures. Mostly, it's largely presentation of quantitative evidence. Whereas if someone is working on quantitative, qualitative research-based evidence, that review often presents results in a conceptual model or a narrative text, which is largely a policy story. They will attempt to present a policy story. But the best would, I mean, if you read the literature, if you go through all of this, the best would be, what we need is a robust, we need both robust quantitative assessment of evidence as well as a qualitative approach in presenting a story, a policy story. So if someone is if someone is able to communicate a policy option using a good story, a good narrative with rigorous evidence, quantitative assessment of evidence, then that is going to be the most effective form of evidence synthesis for policymakers, and the policymakers are likely to rely on such grounded, well-grounded policy synthesis. The purpose of evidence synthesis, and of course, we are going to talk about choice of the policy synthesis methods. The process of synthesizing research evidence is not limited to the dichotomy of quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods. Instead, a wide spectrum of methods are available to address one or more of the following aims for evidence synthesis. The aims for evidence synthesis. So one of the aim in evidence synthesis, aggregating evidences, aggregating information, data from a range of sources. Number two aim is to explain or interpret processes, perceptions, beliefs, and values. Number three could be a grounded theory. Very often, I think policy synthesis is rooted in grounded theory. There could be a theoretical foundation in presenting a policy choice. There are policy analysts, there are researchers who would like to present their policy synthesis in terms of a grounded theory. And fourth aim is to identify gaps in literature or the need for future research. So the policy analyst or evidence synthesis could also, through intended goals of research, for example, need for future research, the gaps in policy, unintended research goals, it can fulfill. Explore also, the aim could be to explore methodological aspects of a method or topic. And lastly, the aim is also to develop or describe frameworks, guidelines, models, measures, scales, and programs. So in terms of the method, the choice of synthesis method depend on the aim or purpose of the secondary research project or the policy analysis question that we have, and which of these intentions the terms the researcher, the team, or the researcher hopes to fulfill. So it depends upon one or more of these aims, choice of method of evidence synthesis. In the last two lectures, we spent a lot of time discussing policy analysis methods.